Chapter 1. The establishment of Atlantis. Atlantis was a landmass between Europe and America, which is now submerged beneath the Atlantic Ocean. For 240,000 years this continent was the subject of a divine experiment to see if people could live in a physical body and still keep their connection with all that is, known as the Creator, God, Godhead or Source. Throughout this long period, tests were set up in a number of different ways, but each time they were terminated as it became clear that humans with free will moved deeper into matter and self-destruction and further from their source. When the conditions were reset for the fifth and last time, Golden Atlantis emerged. For a period of 1,500 years, the people maintained their purity and oneness with their Creator, and enjoyed awesome spiritual, psychic and technological powers. This book explains how they lived, their practices and what we can do today to return to that state. Originally, the Source sent out aspects of itself, known as divine sparks or monads, into all dimensions of the universes to experience and grow. The intention was that they would ultimately bring their experiences back to the Godhead. Some were to come to Earth, where they would have freedom to make their own decisions. Such a vast undertaking needed to be managed, and the Intergalactic Council, made up of cosmic energies, was formed to oversee the operation. Earth was always a special place, for it was pivotal in balancing the energy of our universe because of its connection to the great central sun. Here, several exciting ventures took place. The first was in Mu, a continent in the South Atlantic, although none of these inhabitants incarnated in Atlantis. A later venture took place in Lemuria, a continent in the southern hemisphere, where the Lemurians were created. They were ethereal, without physical form as we understand it, and were androgynous, therefore complete in themselves, reproducing by conscious will and energy transference. However, their state of self-containment meant they had few challenges through which to grow. At first they remained totally psychic and telepathic, maintaining their pure energy and oneness with Source. But, as time passed, their essence became discontented. They could perceive, as all spirits can, but they wanted to experience senses. They had never made love or touched a blade of grass, nor had they tasted food, smelled the sweetness of a rose or felt the soft texture of a loved one's cheek. They longed to know what it is like to go deeper into matter with a physical body, to enjoy sexuality, touch, taste, smell, sight and hearing. They petitioned Source for this. The Source of all that is knew that if this was acceded to, the physical beings could become self-indulgent and hedonistic, that the allurement of the senses might tempt them away from their spiritual wisdom into the illusions of the flesh. So a deal was offered. They were told that their request would be granted on certain conditions. They could incarnate to partake of all the senses as long as they agreed to feel the related emotions. It was believed that because emotions are grounding, this would make people take responsibility for their actions, which in turn would become a catalyst for spiritual seeking and understanding. With the granting of their request, each soul divided into two beings, one masculine and one feminine. In order to reproduce, they now had to copulate with another human of the opposite sex. At last they had the opportunity to see, touch, hear, taste and smell, and to feel emotions. For these beings in bodies of flesh, the continent of Atlantis was prepared, which at first linked Africa, Europe, North America and South America. Those brave ones, who were the first to take male or female form as we know it, were the earliest Atlanteans. An extraordinary new divine quest was underway. The eternal longing of every human to find his or her other half began. Earth was unique. It was the only place in the universes where Source was conducting this particular trial. The one location where spirits could incarnate in a physical body to experience all the senses, as well as emotions and sexuality. It was an amazing opportunity, never before envisaged. These souls would have to learn to manage, support and nurture their physical forms, as well as Gaia, the earth. Furthermore, the essence of their soul would build their skeleton or frame, while their thoughts would create and form their body of flesh. Thus, they were totally responsible for their bodies and their lives. The aim was now to discover whether divine sparks could live a full physical life, while maintaining their connection with the source. Those who incarnated into Atlantis were genetically encoded to be tall and well-built with blonde hair and blue eyes. But Atlantis was only one of several experiments taking place on Earth. In diverse parts of the planet, various races with different genetic coding had other tasks to fulfill. One of the direct results of this is that we now have on Earth a contrast of cultures that do not understand each other. Almost everyone on Earth has had an incarnation in Atlantis, where great spiritual and technological knowledge was amassed beyond anything we can currently comprehend. It is now time for the ancient wisdom to be brought forward so that another golden age can develop. Atlantis became the longest and greatest civilization on Earth and lasted from 250,000 BC to 10,000 BC. During this period, the Intergalactic Council terminated the test several times. On the first and second occasions, the people lost their connection with their divinity and descended into bestiality and the use of black magic. As no progress had been made during these first two attempts, for the third experiment, the Intergalactic Council decided to repopulate Atlantis differently. This time they prepared the continent as a veritable cornucopia of delight. Settlers were invited from the universes and everything was given to them. Homes, temples and all that they could need or want awaited them. They brought amazing technological and psychic skills with them and had very little to learn. At first they were totally cosseted and within a relatively short time the new arrivals divided into two camps. Some became lazy, hedonistic and grasping. They were known as the sons of Belial and sought physical and sensual gratification of every description. Greed, lust, envy, gluttony and violence became their driving force. These were the people who originated the concept of the 7 deadly sins. The children of the Law of One, on the other hand, sought to maintain their connection with the divine. Knowing that their purpose was to remain one with God, they focused on love, light, balance, purity, justice and cosmic wisdom. The schism between the two factions inevitably led to conflict and, despite being given so much, disharmony arose. Another problem occurred during this epoch. As a result of evolution, animals became huge and giant elephants, mammoths, massive cats, enormous horses, mastodon, vast Komodo dragons and birds started to overrun the planet. Masterminded by an entity from another world, they became very aggressive. This made life on the surface very difficult and the people tried all peaceful methods to control the animals without success. Eventually a 5-nation conference was organized to discuss the situation. Using the powers that were available to them, delegates teleported from Russia, Sudan, India and Peru to Atlantis. Such was their desperation that they resolved to create a series of nuclear bombs, which they hoped would kill the beasts. We no longer understand the exact makeup of these bombs, but in 52,000 BC they were detonated underground, resulting in massive earthquakes, the repercussions of which caused the creatures to perish. However, it also upset the balance of nature and the people could not survive either. So the inhabitants of Earth died and their spirits returned to their home planets. As a consequence of this disruption, in 50,000 BC the Earth shifted on its axis and Atlantis became 5 islands. In 28,000 BC the Intergalactic Council met and in their wisdom decided once more to reseed Atlantis with physical beings, men, women and animals. Again, an invitation was sent to the universes and beings arrived from many other planets and galaxies, most of which are unknown to humans today. Only a few of them were the spirits of the Lemurians who originally populated Earth. This time the Council decided that it was not helpful to make life for the volunteers so comfortable when they arrived. The people came in with all the practical and psychic skills they would need in place, but their homes and temples were not built for them. They had to create their own, and this joint undertaking bonded them for a short while. Priests, who had been specially trained in preparation for this challenge, had advanced knowledge with which to help the volunteers. However, this venture deteriorated in the same way as its predecessors. The children of the Law of One sought to maintain their divine connections, but the sons of Belial, who had returned to incarnation, became much stronger than the pure ones. These people had become disconnected from their hearts, and used technology and black occult power to disempower and control the masses. Warmongers proliferated. Throughout history, other sons of Belial have continued to return to Earth and often remain in the background influencing spiritually weak leaders. This is happening even now. The fourth experiment ran for 10,000 years until 18,000 BC when the Intergalactic Council decided that, because of the gross misuse of power, Atlantis must end again. They chose to move the Earth's magnetic pole, using the instrument of a comet to facilitate an abrupt termination. This created an ice age, which was a form of purification for the planet. The landmass was reshaped once more and the 5 islands of Atlantis now became significantly smaller, with only the high places remaining, to form a chain of islands linking to North America. As soon as the previous age ended, the Intergalactic Council started to plan an entirely new phase of Atlantis. While they deliberated for a period of 2,000 years, the planet was cleansed and detoxified by the Ice Age. Atlantis had become much smaller and it clustered in the center of what we now know as the Atlantic Ocean. Bermuda, the Canary Islands and the Azores are a few of the remaining parts of the great continent. Lanzarote was also a physical part of it, but was never peopled as part of the project. Despite previous aborted attempts, the Council had high hopes that this time the new immigrants to Earth would maintain purity and a high level of spirituality. For, having learned from the previous experiments, this one was to be set up in a different way. The Intergalactic Council decided that to enable the purity of the mission to be maintained, the area containing Atlantis must be set apart and protected. This would also mean that the new possibilities could be tested in a controlled environment. At last the plan for the Golden Age was put into place. First, the Intergalactic Council built the Temple of Poseidon, sometimes known as the Cathedral of the Sacred Heights, which contained the Great Crystal, the generator crystal of Atlantis. The temple was created in the cradle of the Atlas Mountains and formed a 7th peak. These peaks symbolized the 7 pillars of the universe, which are the 7 spiritual laws or cosmic energies that govern humanity. These are: the Law of One. This is represented by the Great Temple itself in the center of Atlantis and affirms that there is no separation from God. It proclaims we are all part of the whole and our actions affect every single creature throughout the universes. For example, when a polar bear sneezes in the Arctic, a grain of sand moves in the Sahara. The law of karma. There is a spiritual working out for all things, though it may take lifetimes. Thoughts, words and actions are all energies that come back to you in the exact measure at which you give them out. Ultimately, as you give, so shall you receive. The law of manifestation. Like attracts like. Your thoughts, words and deeds attract like to them and can draw material things, people and experiences into your physical life. You are the power that creates everything in your life. The law of grace. Unconditional love, forgiveness and compassion offer grace, which dissolves karma and accrues blessings. The law of responsibility. When you take responsibility for your thoughts, words and actions, you take mastery of your life. You are then able to respond appropriately to all that you experience. The law of unconditional love. Unconditional love is a state of acceptance and non-attachment, which forms no emotional strings. When you love in this way, you set yourself and others free. The law of intention. The moment you gain clarity, you can make decisions. This moves the universal energy to assist you and you can progress with strength. If your intention is pure, you earn no karma, whatever the outcome. For example, if you are expanding your business with the intention of bringing help to disadvantaged people, but some employees are unfortunately made redundant, it does not weigh against you. On the other hand, if you are sacking people careless of their misfortune and for the sole purpose of excessive personal gain, you will bear karma when your soul is ready to do so. The 7 pillars of the universe, the 7 spiritual laws. The Intergalactic Council was the architect of Atlantis. They worked through 12 highly evolved souls, the high priests and priestesses who took physical bodies that vibrated between the 5th and 6th dimensional frequency. They were collectively known as the Alta and were the master builders, who made all the practical earthly decisions about the setting up of the continent while taking general instruction from the Council. For example, they channeled the spiritual laws for Earth through Thoth, who was one of the high priests of Atlantis and was later worshipped as a god in Egypt. Atlantis was divided into 12 regions, each one governed by one of the Alta, so naturally each had a different focus. In the earliest days of the Golden Times, only these 12 great initiates could enter the Temple of Poseidon. Later, others were initiated. At the start of this final experiment, the volunteers arrived as strangers to each other, in bodies, which they had never before experienced. This time the Intergalactic Council realized that, if the volunteers to Earth were going to maintain their divine connection and learn from being in a body, they would have to cooperate, share and work together. This would help them to maintain a high frequency. So only water, earth, plants and trees awaited them. Nothing else was prepared. For 1,500 years, during the Golden Period, the Intergalactic Council and the Illumined Ones throughout the universes watched with awe as those incarnate in Atlantis maintained divine simplicity, performed incredible technological feats and developed wondrous spiritual powers. These settlers from all over the universes brought heaven to earth and created the highest spiritual time there has ever been on this planet. However, eventually history repeated itself. Control, lust, cruelty and greed overtook most of the people. Despite many attempts on the part of the Council to help the planet, at last a decision was made to terminate the Atlantean experiment for the final time. In approximately 10,000 BC, Poseidon, high priest of Atlantis and god of the seas, declared that Atlantis must be flooded, an event recorded in the Bible and other literature of the world. The great continent finally disappeared under the waves. Some spirits returned to their homes, but those who caused the destruction were inevitably tied to Earth until they redeemed their karma. The high priests and priestesses, who later became mythical gods in Egypt and Greece, led those members of their tribes who were pure and willing, to various parts of the world that had been specially prepared for them. We discuss this later in the book. By breeding with local people in their new areas, they were to maintain the genetic wisdom of Atlantis on Earth. 12,000 years later, we have once more devolved to the depths of human degradation. For eons the planet has been so dark and heavy that the Intergalactic Council could not reach us without doing great damage, which they were reluctant to do. Now, at last, humans are looking towards the spiritual, with resulting upheaval and turmoil as the shadow of humanity is released. The planet is becoming lighter and the angelic forces and higher beings can connect with many of us once more. The incredible spiritual wisdom and technological knowledge of pure Atlantis has been recorded and stored. Many of these great ones are now returning into incarnation at the start of the Aquarian Age to facilitate the return of the energy of pure Atlantis. It is time now for those who are ready, to access and bring back this light and to enable the energy of the golden times to return. Chapter 2. The Early Days. At the start of the Golden Age of Atlantis, once the Temple of Poseidon was completed, the Intergalactic Council sent out an invitation to the whole cosmos inviting souls to incarnate and take part in the latest experiment. Souls responded from many star systems and universes, and the high priests and priestesses, the rulers of the 12 tribes, chose beings with specific energies for the individual regions. These Atlanteans did not look as we look, for they carried a higher light, which they radiated, so there was an ethereal quality about them. Nor did the original population birth through human mothers. They teleported or came in spaceships and in ways that we do not yet understand. Like all beings who incarnate, they had to go through the veil of amnesia, forgetting their divine origins. This was part of the curriculum for anyone coming to Earth, and it must have been extremely difficult for people arriving in adult bodies, without the support, love and teaching that parents offer to new babies. The Intergalactic Council watched with interest as this last experiment took place. Having taken on physical form with all human needs and wants, could spirit master desire? Could these people still maintain their oneness with all that is? Could they live in peace, cooperation and harmony? In the early days, the volunteers chosen were all at the top of the 5th dimensional frequency range. Would this make a difference? 7,000 people incarnated into each of the tribes, 84,000 souls in all, of which approximately half were male and half female. They were genetically encoded to walk, talk, eat and to perform human functions and certain basic skills, which they had to practice and develop. Individuals also had 12 strands of DNA. It has only been since the fall of Atlantis that we have been reduced to 2 strands of DNA. Much information remains latent within us, to be restored when we are ready. How strange it must have felt for those in this first phase, for their spirits had never before been encased in a physical form. Initially, the newcomers were given something akin to a huge, silk tent for shelter and some food and basic clothing. Together they set out to build camps, then solid structures for their homes. They started to grow and gather food. From the beginning, they all pooled their talents for the common good. The plan was cleverly devised in this way by the Intergalactic Council to encourage people to work together. In cooperating for their common survival, they created community. It was because they had a vision for the highest good that the frequency remained so steadfast. They were not given the right to an idyllic lifestyle. They had to earn this by following the spiritual laws that governed this planet. However, at that time, it was easier for people to create heaven on Earth than it is now because they arrived here free of karma. Just as now, no human walked alone. Guardian angels were appointed by Source to look after each individual and act as a messenger and intermediary with the Godhead. These angels held the divine blueprint for the life mission of their charges. Because the frequency of the people was so high, the guardian angels of that time had a similar frequency to the archangels who help humans in current times. The land prepared for the people was abundantly wooded. Rivers rushed down from the mountains and crisscrossed the plains, giving pure water for drinking and bathing. The soil was very rich and fertile, and the grass was lush and green. Edible plants would be gathered, and they intuitively knew which ones served their purpose. They also intrinsically understood how to make beverages, for example using herbs for tea. The premise followed by the Intergalactic Council was that if the newcomers needed something in order to survive, the information would rise to consciousness. The weather was mild everywhere, but it varied across the 5 islands, being cooler in the north than the south. The early settlers had to start by building dwellings from the natural materials available and by organizing their communities. They had to create furniture, cooking pots, clothing and even pathways, but their first priority was to build temples. Each of the 12 tribes built a simple house of worship, really a place of thanksgiving. Every evening, when their work of building and creating was complete, they went to the temple to give thanks for the opportunity and the divine munificence. They lived totally in the moment, joyously celebrating all that they had, with no concept of tomorrow. The focal point of each temple was a crystal. These connected to each other as well as to the magnificent generator crystal in the Temple of Poseidon. Because running water brought them peace and harmony, they soon built fountains in these places of thanksgiving. Later, the buildings were used for education, as well as community centers, where social gatherings took place. The Atlanteans of this period also loved to give thanks to the divine out in nature. They built stone circles, with a predetermined link to a star, through which they could draw in wisdom and knowledge from the galaxies. All the stars of their origin were honored and their energies were linked in this way to Earth. Animals. At first there were no animals, but soon after the humans inhabited Atlantis, animals incarnated, starting with those who offered themselves in service, such as cows, goats, sheep, horses and other beasts of burden. All the early Atlanteans were vegetarian, though they accepted the produce of animals. Humans linked telepathically, as well as verbally, with these animals and asked permission to sit on the horses, which they learned to ride bareback. They accepted milk from cows and goats, wool from sheep, and eggs from hens. All this involved communication and helped to develop community. After the service animals arrived in Atlantis, cats, dogs and other domestic animals followed, as well as wild ones. They were all creatures who wished to take part in this most extraordinary intergalactic opportunity for spiritual development. Spiritual and psychic gifts. Each person had psychic gifts like clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, healing and telepathy. However, other gifts such as teleportation, mind control, telekinesis and levitation had to be developed. The rulers decided that if the early settlers of this golden age were to arrive with all their gifts of power in place, the foundation for cooperation would be missing. It is exactly the same in current times. A baby is born genetically encoded with gifts it has acquired over lifetimes in this and other star systems. These talents have to be practiced, worked on and developed. A gifted musician has to practice to become a maestro, the same as a born gardener has to learn about how to work with his plants. Emotions and sexuality. The people were not only learning to survive in completely uncharted territory, they also had to develop and integrate their emotions and their sexuality, two aspects that none of these newcomers to Earth had ever experienced. One more challenge was the instinctive longing to seek their soulmate, which was encoded into the DNA of humans when the androgynous Lemurians decided to split into masculine and feminine bodies. From that moment, humans quested to find the other aspect of themselves, their twin flame. In current times, humanity has sunk down to a third-dimensional frequency, where sexuality is often based on sensation and need. Today, the experience of orgasm offers a moment in the now and is often the nearest a person gets to the bliss of connection with God. In the early days of Atlantis, when the settlers vibrated at a fifth-dimensional frequency, the people were not interested in sex without love. They sought only a soulmate, one who resonated deeply with them at emotional, mental, spiritual, as well as physical levels. The sexual expression of love was not only a merging of their auric fields, but it also enabled them to complete their lost wholeness. Experiencing the senses. Those courageous, early adventurers had undertaken a mighty task. Arriving in alien territory peopled by strangers from various planetary systems, they were expected to work in cooperation with all the different beings and learn to relate with them to create a new community. They had to do this while maintaining harmony and the highest integrity, and at the same time they were to act with peace, love, joy and gratitude. These newcomers really did appreciate their amazing good fortune at being chosen from trillions of volunteers to experience life in a human body. Imagine their awe each morning as the sun rose in its full glory and sailed across the blue sky. They watched with joy, the energy fields of every living thing, radiating and pulsing in the clear air. They listened rapturously to the song of birds, the chirrup of a cricket or the rustle of leaves. They would stroke a leaf or run their fingers through cool, running water and rejoice in the sensation. When they touched the warm, moist earth they could smell its rich smell and they would marvel at the sweet fragrance of a flower. For the first time they could hear the voice of a friend and feel the emotion of love flooding their hearts. They could cuddle or hug another being in the flesh and feel his or her warmth and closeness. To them, it was extraordinary and filled them with wonder. Something as simple as eating a banana allowed them to see, touch, smell and taste, so they constantly felt blessed to be allowed the opportunity of incarnation. Throughout the universes, angels and spirits, high and low, have longed for these experiences. Even now, we who have been here many times appreciate the unique wonders of Earth, such as a glorious sunset or the smell of a flower, for all who incarnate are genetically encoded to do so. The early inhabitants of Atlantis who had never been here before were even more profoundly affected. Our current world is so full of noise that we can no longer easily find silence. But the land at that time was still and quiet, and the people were filled with a sense of deep peace. They learned that if they breathed slowly they could maintain this sense of serenity and savor everything in their new world. Rulers of Atlantis. The high priests and priestesses were originally the benefactors of the people, providing them with their survival needs, food, shelter and clothing, until they could create their own. When they were self-sufficient, the great initiates focused on teaching them about the power of crystals and how to use them. The next part of their training was awesome, if they wished to undertake it. It involved mind control, which enabled them to practice levitation, telekinesis, teleportation and the ability to manifest. Their training also encompassed the use of the frequencies of sound and light. Eventually, if they attained the status of magi, they were taught to fly and communicate with other galaxies. During this fifth experiment, the Intergalactic Council introduced technology slowly. Information was genetically encoded into the high priests and priestesses, and when it was believed that the people were ready for another level of learning, they would discuss it with the council before showing it to their charges. There were various levels of priesthood. high priest and priestess, mage, initiate, adept and novice. The most highly evolved were the high priests and priestesses, who liaised with the intergalactic council and communicated with the magi and the initiates. Initially, the rulers had a duty to look out for those who had the potential to become spiritual lights in their own right and who would succeed them. For this they sought those who exhibited the qualities of leadership and pure spirituality. They also selected people who demonstrated the various aptitudes required for the golden future of Atlantis. Management and organizational skills were paramount in these early days as well as throughout this whole period of history. They needed people to oversee cultural affairs, building design, teaching, healing and many other aspects of life. We cannot underestimate the training the first group had to go through or the work they had to undertake to prepare Atlantis, not only for themselves, but also for the generations to follow. However, those original residents of Golden Atlantis have now evolved into mighty beings in their own right. Many of them returned to the star of their soul origin, taking their new, higher understandings and wisdom with them. This they taught to the beings on their home planets, thus spreading the energy of pure Atlantis through the galaxies. A similar challenge and opportunity is being offered to every single person who has incarnated onto Earth at this present time. The chances for spiritual promotion are greater now than they have ever been. Exercise. Back to basics. This is an invitation to go back to basics, to experience the essence of being in a body. Imagine you are one of the early Atlanteans and this is your first visit to Earth. Go outside and perceive Earth with the senses of a stranger in a foreign place. For example, go to different trees and feel the bark with your fingertips, pick up a pebble or stone and stroke it or be totally still and listen to the sound of the birds.